All right, welcome to another deep dive today. We are going super deep into the way our brains and our bodies react to the world around us, specifically sounds and sensations. So I bet you've experienced this too. Have you ever been totally thrown off by a sound that seemed totally normal to everyone else, or maybe felt this wave of calm wash over you just by listening to like a specific kind of sound online?
Oh, yeah. I think most people have had at least one of those experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to tackle misophonia and ASMR today.
Really interesting stuff.
And we've got some great sources to help us really understand what's going on. We're going to be pulling from the Wikipedia page on misophonia, which is a really comprehensive overview.
A great place to start, yeah.
Gives us a solid base. And then we're going to dig into some actual research, specifically a research study that looked at ASMR and how it impacts people's moods, attention, and even some of the physiological stuff.
Yeah, some cool findings in there.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to kind of see how these two things that, at first glance seem totally opposite, it can actually give us a better understanding of how our brains work.
Totally. Like, how do we process sensory information? What's going on there? It's a big puzzle.
Big puzzle. All right, so let's start with misophonia. So the Wikipedia page really breaks it down well. Essentially, it's a strong, really strong negative reaction to specific sounds or even things that you visually associate with those sounds.
Right. And they call these triggers.
Yeah, triggers. And it's way more than just finding something a little annoying. Right?
Oh, for sure. We're talking genuine distress. For people with misophonia, these triggers, they cause real suffering. And what's crucial here is that their reactions, like emotionally and even physically, they're so much stronger than what most of us would feel in the same situation.
Yeah, it's not just like, oh, that's a little bit annoying, turn it down. It's a whole other level.
It's like a visceral response. Like something that might bug someone a tiny bit could send someone with misophonia into a spiral of like anxiety and anger.
Yeah. And that's got to have a major impact on your everyday life. The Wikipedia page even mentions like trouble achieving goals, communicating with people, even just enjoying social situations, all because of this.
Yeah. Think about it. If the sounds of everyday life, like things you can't really escape, are constantly causing you intense negative emotions, it makes everything harder. You're always on edge.
Yeah, you're in a constant state of fight or flight almost.
Right, exactly. It can be really limiting.
And it's interesting because you might think this is like a new thing, but it actually has roots going back to like audiology, all the way back in 2001.
Yeah, early 2000s.
But it wasn't until 2013 that some researchers, actually Amsterdam, really started to define it more formally. And they actually proposed it as a specific condition with like, criteria based on what they were seeing in people.
Yeah, which is cool because it shows how like what we understand about the brain, it's always changing, always evolving.
For sure. And even though that was over a decade ago, misophonia still isn't officially recognized as a diagnosis in like the big manuals like the DSM-5-TR or the ICD-11.
It's wild, right?
Yeah, it is. And as the Wikipedia page points out, that lack of formal recognition can make it so much harder for people to actually get a diagnosis and then, find the right treatment, the right support.
Yeah. It's like, something's wrong, but without that official label, it can be hard to get others to take it seriously, and then finding the right help becomes even more of a challenge.
Right. It reminds me of other conditions that took a while to gain acceptance in the medical community. Sometimes it takes time for new understanding to filter through.
Absolutely. It's a process.
But it's not like there hasn't been any progress at all. I remember reading something about a group of experts coming together and kind of, agreeing on a definition.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was a huge step. So back in 2022, you had this international group of experts, and they actually came up with a consensus definition of misophonia, which was huge because now researchers and clinicians, they're all on the same page.
Right. It's standardized.
Exactly. And that's really helping to move the research forward and also helping clinicians to better identify and support people who are dealing with this.
Awesome. So, we've talked about these triggers, but when someone with misophonia actually encounters one, what's happening to them? Like, what are they feeling and what's happening in their body?
Yeah.
Because it sounds like it's pretty intense.
It is. So, according to the Wikipedia overview, we're talking about a whole cascade of negative emotions, anger, like extreme irritation, disgust, even anxiety. And sometimes this can escalate to like full-on rage.
Wow.
And it's not just in your head either. It's physiological too. Your body's reacting as if you're in danger. So you get muscle tension, your heart starts racing, you might start sweating. It's like your body is in fight or flight mode.
Yeah, it's a full body experience. It's not just like a thought.
Definitely not.
And it's important to note that it's not just the volume of a sound. That's a key difference between misophonia and something like hyperacusis, right?
Right. So with hyperacusis, it's all about the intensity, like how loud a sound is. But with misophonia, it's much more about the specific pattern of the sound, or even like the meaning that the person attaches to it.
Right. So it's not just like a random loud noise. It's very specific sounds.
Totally specific. It's the what that's making the sound, sometimes even the who that's setting off the reaction, not just how loud it is.
And isn't it weird that sometimes if the person with misophonia is making the sound themselves, like let's say they're chewing, they might not have that same reaction.
That's so interesting, isn't it? And it really points to the fact that it's not just about the sound itself, like the sound waves hitting your ear. It's about context, the source of the sound, and maybe even a sense of control over that sound.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There's so much more to it than just, oh, my ears are sensitive.
So let's talk about these triggers, because the range is pretty wild. Like the Wikipedia article has this whole list from the Duke Misophonia questionnaire, and there's a lot.
Yeah, it's a long list.
It is. It is. Can you walk us through some of the common ones?
Yeah.
Sure. So like a lot of the common ones are mouth sounds, chewing, lip smacking, swallowing, even drinking.
Oh, yeah.
And then there are nasal and throat sounds. Sniffing, throat clearing, coughing. Some people even have it with snoring.
That's tough if you're sleeping next to somebody.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And then repetitive sounds are big triggers too, whether it's a person like tapping their fingers or clicking a pen or an object making a repeating sound.
Makes sense. Yeah.
And then we're talking about rustling or tearing sounds, certain types of speech sounds, and even body sounds like cracking knuckles.
I've heard that one before.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic. Then there are things like rubbing sounds, stomping, like loud walking, muffled sounds, background talking, anything repetitive. And you know what? Even animal sounds can be triggers for some people.
Wow. So basically every sound in the world.
Pretty much. And it gets even weirder. Sometimes it's not even the sound itself, it's visual. Like just seeing someone about to make a sound can set someone off.
That's like anticipating it.
Totally. Like, oh no, here it comes. And there's actually a term for that now, misokinesia. It describes misophonia reactions that are specifically triggered by things you see, usually repetitive movements, like if someone's fidgeting or jiggling their leg, that can be a trigger for some people.
It's fascinating how it's not just an ear thing, it's a brain thing.
That's totally a brain thing.
Yeah. And the reactions aren't just like internal annoyance. Like the Wikipedia article talks about these cognitive and behavioral responses, and they use this term S5 dimensions to categorize them. Can you break that down for us?
Yeah, so the S5 basically helps us understand how misophonia affects people's thoughts and actions. Like, how does it show up in their lives? So first you have internalizing appraisals, which is basically when someone gets really self-critical or feels guilty or ashamed about their reactions.
And why am I like this?
Exactly. And then there's externalizing appraisals, which is more about blaming other people for making the sound, like feeling disrespected or annoyed with them.
Right, because you just assume they're doing it on purpose to annoy you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then there are anxiety and avoidance responses, which is like you can imagine people start isolating themselves, avoiding situations where they might encounter their triggers.
Makes sense. It's a coping mechanism.
Totally. And then there's feeling threatened or overwhelmed. Some people feel trapped by the sound, almost like they can't escape it. They might feel helpless, even panicky. And unfortunately, sometimes it can lead to aggressive outbursts.
That's really tough. It's almost like their body's hijacked by this reaction.
Yeah, and what's interesting is the Wikipedia overview also says that people with misophonia are usually aware that their reactions are like bigger than the situation warrants.
Right, they know.
Which adds another layer of difficulty because then they feel like embarrassed or like they can't explain it to other people who don't experience it.
I can imagine. It must be very isolating.
It can be.
So when does this usually start? Like when do people first notice that they have this strong reaction to sound?
So the research suggests it usually starts in childhood or early adolescence, like between 9 and 13 is the typical age range.
Yeah, wow. So young.
Yeah, although it can definitely start later too. And it's interesting, often the first triggers are sounds from people who are close to them, like family members or even pets.
Oh, that's hard.
Yeah, it's not like it's some random stranger, it's people you love.
And I mean, how common is this? Do we even know?
It's tough to say for sure. The estimates vary a lot depending on the study and how they define misophonia.
Right, everyone's got their own way.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But some studies that are based on representative samples, they suggest that it could be anywhere from 4.6% to 12.8% of adults who experience misophonia to a degree that really affects their lives. And there was a study in the UK in 2023 that found even higher numbers, like around 18%.
Wow, almost 1 in 5.
Yeah, so it's not as rare as people might think.
Definitely not. And it's not just about being annoyed. It sounds like it can really impact a person's life and even their mental health.
For sure, it can cause problems in school, at work, socially, in families. And unfortunately, it can make other mental health conditions worse, like depression and anxiety. And there's even a connection to phonophobia, which is a fear of sounds.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And in some more extreme cases, it's even been linked to thoughts of self-harm or suicide, which really highlights how serious this can be.
It's not just a quirky little thing.
Absolutely not. It's a real condition with real consequences.
And the Wikipedia page actually talks about how it's handled in, education settings in the U.S.
Right. So it's not currently recognized as a specific disability under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, which helps students with certain learning disabilities. But students with misophonia might be able to get accommodations and support through what's called a 504 plan.
I see. So it's kind of like a workaround.
Yeah. It's not perfect, but it can help create a more supportive learning environment by addressing some of the sensory challenges that these students face.
Okay, so we've got a good grasp of what misophonia is and how it impacts people. But what's actually happening in the brain? What's causing these reactions?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? What's the root cause? We still don't fully understand the neurological mechanisms behind misophonia, but there are some interesting theories out there.
Yeah, let's delve into those.
Yeah, for sure. So one thing that's interesting is that studies haven't really found any issues with the way sound is processed by the ear itself, the initial step.
So it's not like a hearing problem.
Right, exactly. Which suggests that the problem is most likely happening in the brain, in how those sounds are interpreted and how the brain reacts to them.
It's higher up.
Yeah, higher up.
So one of the models that's talked about is this neurophysiological model, which is often linked to Jastroboff.
Yeah.
What's the main idea behind this one?
So this model basically tries to differentiate misophonia from hyperacusis, where loud sounds are the problem. And it says that in hyperacusis, it's more about the physical intensity of the sound. But with misophonia, it's more about the meaning or the significance that a particular sound has for the individual. It's like the sound triggers a specific association or emotion.
Okay, that makes sense.
So the theory goes that there might be stronger connections in the brains of people with misophonia between the parts that process sound, the auditory system, and the areas that are involved in emotions and involuntary bodily responses, the limbic system and the autonomic nervous system.
Right, so it's like a super highway between those areas.
Yeah, and those stronger connections could be why there's such a strong emotional and physical reaction.
And this model is actually connected to tinnitus retraining therapy, or TRT, right?
Yeah, because the researchers who developed this model, they also developed TRT, which is used for tinnitus, ringing in the ears. And some people have tried to adapt TRT for misophonia. But the Wikipedia page points out that some of the central ideas of this model, especially the idea that there's increased connectivity between these brain areas, it hasn't really been consistently supported by research.
Okay, so it's an interesting idea, but maybe not the whole picture.
Right. And some critics have also said that the model is a bit vague about which specific parts of the brain are involved, and it doesn't really explain how those non-sound triggers, like visual triggers, fit in.
Yeah, there are definitely some holes. So what about the other main model, the action perception model? How does that try to explain things?
So this is a newer idea, and it suggests that when we hear a sound, especially a sound that we associate with an action, like chewing, that information goes not only to the auditory cortex, but it also activates areas in our brain that are involved in controlling movement. Even though we're not chewing ourselves, our brain kind of simulates the action.
It's like mirror neurons.
Yeah, kind of like that. And the idea is that in people with misophonia, this motor representation is way stronger or different than in people without it.
Okay, so it's not just hearing the sound. It's almost like experiencing it in your own body.
Right. And that strong motor representation then sends a signal to the insular cortex, which is part of the brain that's involved in self-awareness and emotion. And the insula then talks to the amygdala, which processes emotions, and to the autonomic nervous system, which controls those automatic body responses. And that chain reaction, they think, is what causes those intense emotional and physical symptoms.
Wow, so it's all about how your brain interprets the sound as an action.
Exactly. It's less about the sound itself, more about the meaning we attach to it.
That's really interesting. And this model could explain why misophonia reactions can be so specific to the situation and who's making the sound.
Right, because the context really matters. And you know what's even cooler? This model might even explain why some people with misophonia actually mimic the trigger sound.
Oh yeah, that's a weird one.
I know, right? But the thinking is that by making the sound themselves, they might be sending a signal to their brain that helps to reduce that overactivity in the insula. It's like they're trying to cancel out the trigger.
It's like a self-soothing technique almost.
Exactly. It's like, I'm going to take control of this sound and make it my own.
But this model probably needs more research too, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. While it fits with some of the brain imaging data, a lot of the specific predictions haven't been directly tested yet. And like the Wikipedia article says, a lot of the evidence is correlational, meaning we see these things happening together, but we don't know for sure that one causes the other.
Right, correlation doesn't equal causation.
Exactly. Plus, this model mainly focuses on triggers that are related to human actions, so it doesn't really address everything.
So we've talked a lot about what misophonia is and the theories behind it. But how is it actually diagnosed and managed?
Well, it's tricky because there isn't a universally agreed upon set of diagnostic criteria.
Right. No gold standard.
Exactly. And a lot of doctors aren't even familiar with it.
That's got to be frustrating.
Very frustrating. Plus, misophonia can happen alongside other conditions like anxiety, PTSD, OCD, and depression, which can make it even harder to tease apart.
Yeah. It gets complicated.
And it's important to differentiate it from hyperacusis and phonophobia, although sometimes people experience all three.
Oh, wow.
And sometimes misophonia can be misdiagnosed as something else, like anxiety or OCD.
Yeah, so it's important to find someone who really understands it.
Totally, someone who's up to date on the research. And the general recommendation is to do a comprehensive assessment, like take a detailed history of the person's experiences with triggers, do some interviews, maybe some audiological exams to rule out other hearing issues. And there are questionnaires that can help gauge the severity of symptoms, like the Duke Misophonia Questionnaire and the S5.
Okay, so once you've got a diagnosis, how do you manage it?
So right now, the focus is mainly on helping people develop coping strategies.
So not necessarily a cure, but learning to live with it.
Right. It's about understanding your triggers, learning to identify them, and then figuring out what helps you manage your reactions. Some smaller studies have looked at things like tinnitus retraining therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, and exposure therapy, but we don't really have definitive answers on whether those are effective for misophonia.
Gotcha. So the research is still ongoing.
Totally. And other things that people are exploring are acceptance-based therapies and mindfulness.
Okay, interesting. What about medication? Is there anything like that?
The research on medication is pretty limited right now. There have been some studies that suggest that a medication called propranolol might be helpful for some people, and there are some reports that clomipramine, which is used for OCD, might be beneficial. But again, more research is needed. And in the meantime, a lot of people find relief through common coping strategies, like avoiding triggers, using distractions like music or earplugs, and sometimes even mimicking the trigger sounds themselves.
And I remember you mentioning secret repatterning therapy, or SRT, before.
Yeah, SRT is out there, but it's not really accepted by most clinicians, and there's no solid evidence that it works.
Got it. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground with misophonia. Let's move on to ASMR, which, like we said, is kind of the opposite. So for those who might not be familiar, what is ASMR?
ASMR stands for Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response, and it's basically this pleasant, often tingly sensation that starts on the scalp and can spread down the neck and spine. People who experience ASMR, they usually say it feels relaxing, calming, and even gives them a sense of well-being.
And it's triggered by specific things, right?
Yeah, specific audio or visual stimuli, like it might be whispering, tapping sounds, crinkling paper, things like that.
Okay, I've seen those videos online.
Exactly. Those are designed to trigger ASMR.
And the research paper we looked at for this episode, it actually went beyond just describing the feeling, right? It looked at some potential cognitive effects.
Yeah, they wanted to see how ASMR might affect things like thinking and attention. And interestingly, they found that listening to ASMR triggering sounds actually made it a little harder for people who experience ASMR to switch between tasks and to ignore distractions.
Really? So it's almost like it makes you less focused in some ways.
In a way, yeah. But their working memory, which is like our short-term memory, wasn't affected. And the researchers thought this might be because of activity in a brain network called the default mode network, which has been observed in brain imaging studies of people experiencing ASMR. It kind of suggests that their brains might be wired a little differently.
So even though it feels relaxing, it might actually have a temporary impact on certain types of focus. But the study also said that those same people didn't show any problems with their attention unless they were actively experiencing ASMR, right?
Right. It's not like it's a permanent thing. It's just that during the ASMR experience, there might be some changes in how the brain processes certain information.
I see. And the study also looked at some physiological stuff like heart rate and skin response. What did they find there?
So they found that, as expected, heart rate tended to be lower in people who were experiencing ASMR, which fits with the idea that it's relaxing. But they also saw an increase in skin conductance level, which usually means there's increased arousal.
So it's relaxing, but also arousing.
Yeah, it's a bit of a paradox. But the researchers pointed out that ASMR can also be associated with feelings of excitement and pleasure, so it's not just pure relaxation.
Right, it's more complex than that. And there's actually been research showing that pupil dilation happens during ASMR too.
Yeah, that's another indicator that there are some real physiological changes happening.
Cool. So is there a certain type of person who's more likely to experience ASMR? Like, are there any personality traits that are linked to it?
Yeah, there have been studies on that. People who experience ASMR tend to be more open to new experiences, and they're sometimes less conscientious. And they also tend to be higher in neuroticism and, in some studies, lower in extroversion and agreeableness.
Interesting. So maybe being open to new experiences makes you more likely to be receptive to those ASMR triggers.
That's the theory. And the study we looked at also used EEG to look at brainwave activity. And they found something pretty interesting. There was an increase in what's called beta power in the left temporal area of the brain in everyone after watching the ASMR video, whether they experienced tingles or not.
So what does that mean, beta power?
Well, the researchers suggested that it might mean that people are more focused or absorbed in the experience, like what you'd see in a flow state. And they also found a decrease in alpha power in certain areas, specifically in the people who experience tingles, and a decrease in theta power in some areas for everyone.
Okay, so the brainwave stuff is suggesting more of a focused, immersive state rather than just pure relaxation.
Exactly. It's like your brain is really tuned in to what's happening.
Can you remind us how they set up this ASMR study?
So they had 38 psychology students from the Netherlands, and they measured their mood, attention, and personality using questionnaires and tasks. And they also measured their heart rate, skin conductance, and brain waves with EEG. Then they showed them either an ASMR video or a control video and compared the responses of those who felt the tingles to those who didn't.
And what were the main takeaways?
Well, one of the big findings was that people who felt the tingles reported feeling less depressed after watching the ASMR video, but they didn't find any big changes in other moods or in attention. They did find lower heart rate across the board during the ASMR video, and they also found that increase in beta power and decrease in alpha and theta power that we talked about. Oh, and there was a slight trend towards lower extroversion in people who were sensitive to ASMR, but it wasn't a super strong finding.
Cool. And of course, no study is perfect. They mentioned some limitations to their study, too.
Right. They only used one ASMR video, so their findings might not apply to everyone, and they divided people into groups just based on tingles, which isn't the whole picture of ASMR. Plus, their sample size wasn't huge.
All right. But still, it's interesting research.
Oh, definitely. It gives us more pieces to the puzzle.
So we have these two things: misophonia, with its intense negative reaction to sound, and ASMR, with its often pleasant and calming sensations. It seems like they're on opposite ends of the spectrum. But is there any overlap? Can someone experience both?
You know, it's interesting. The Wikipedia article mentions that some people report having both misophonia and ASMR. They say some sounds trigger ASMR while others trigger misophonia, which just goes to show how complex our brains are and how much individual variation there is.
Like the same input can be processed in totally different ways.
Exactly. It all depends on the person, the context, the specific sound.
It really makes you think about how subjective our experiences of the world are.
Totally. There's so much we still don't understand about how our brains work.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the big things we should take away?
Well, we've learned that misophonia is a real condition that causes serious distress. And it's not just about being sensitive to loud sounds, it's about specific triggers and the way the brain processes them. There are a couple of models that try to explain it, but we need more research to really understand what's going on. ASMR, on the other hand, is this cool sensory experience that can have a lot of positive effects. And research suggests it's more about focused attention and immersion than just relaxation. And the fact that some people experience both just highlights how complex and individual our brains are.
And both misophonia and ASMR are still being actively studied, so there's a lot more to discover.
Absolutely. And it's important for people to know that if they're struggling with misophonia, they're not alone, and there are resources out there to help them.
Yes, definitely. So here's a final thought for our listeners. Think about what we've discussed today and what it means for how we understand sensory experiences. What can we learn from the fact that people react to the same things in such different ways? And what does it tell us about the brain's amazing ability to interpret the world around us? It's a fascinating area of research, and there's still so much to explore. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive,
Thanks for having me.
and we'll see you next time.
See you then.